government has granted 23% salary increments to public sector workers for the year 2024. The salary increments will cover January to June, while another increment of 25% will be implemented between July and December. The National Tripartite Committee also approved 22% increment for daily minimum wage from 14 cedis 88 pesos for 2023 to 18 cedis for 2024. This decision, he said, was arrived at taking into consideration the current economic situation in the country. The salary increment will cover January to June 2024, while another increment of 2% will be implemented for between July to December 2024. Ghanaians may have to brace up for the introduction of some new taxes as the Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta appears before Parliament on Wednesday to deliver government's last fiscal policy to the House of Legislature. Members of the Minority Caucus have hinted that the Finance Minister intends to raise some 11 billion cedis through the imposition of new taxes in the 2024 budget.
People of Ghana have been taxed so much. The tax burden already is very, very high. And so it will be inappropriate to come with new taxes. Rather, the minister should look at cost cutting in terms of expenditure.
The Suspended Fiscal Responsibility Act, none of you are raising questions about it. In the Fiscal Responsibility Act, he will resurrect it. Like Jesus Christ, it has to come back again because there must be fiscal discipline, work towards fiscal consolidation.
The reintroduction of the road tolls, which was abolished in the 2022 budget, is likely going to feature in the 2024 budget. However, motorists, pedestrians and hawkers, the news team engaged at one of the two toll booths on the Accra-Tema motorway, welcomed the reintroduction, but wants the e-levy scrapped because the tolls were doing better than the electronic levy.
Bring the toll booths back again because it's helpful. They've abandoned it for some time now. It has no use. And then in another way, it helps the disabled.
What was the initial reason behind the cancellation of the rotos to introduce e-levy? Has the e-levy been helpful so far? No, we are not seeing any improvements. Look at the state of the motorway, very bad. So if they should bring back the toll, I think that revenue can be used to cater for the motorway.
Journalist and private legal practitioner Ken Kranche has vowed to bounce back after the Supreme Court dismissed his application challenging the eligibility of John Mahama to contest the 2024 general election. The editor of Daily Searchlight was giving a reality check after the Apex Court found his application defective after being saddled with procedural errors.
I appreciate the position of the Supreme Court, so immediately of an advice I withdrew the writ. After 2nd of December, I'm going to come back again and refile the writ according to the format that the court thinks will be suitable.
Minister of Health Kweku Agyeman-Manu has come under intense criticism after informing Parliament that the Finance Minister has secured 50 million euros in local funding for the construction of the La General Hospital. The minority, however, criticized the minister for failing to provide clear timelines on when work will resume.
The statement by the minister gives no hope. In fact, he has actually said nothing. The Speaker, by the actions and inactions of the government, it clearly means that they were not committed to the project.
You say he has identified funds. Is it from the consolidated fund or you are coming with a loan? If you are coming with a loan, should we expect 50 million euro or 68 million euro as was approved? So, Minister, come well.
Well, there's more news on 3news.com. Make some time and visit 3news.com. Coming up next year on Ghana Tonight, government and organized labor conclude on a base pay negotiations, agreeing to an increment of 23% beginning January 2024. Now, speak to a labor expert on this, because clearly, from what we gathered from our chief labor correspondent, Daniel Opoku, the labor, talking about the TUC and the clocks, weren't too happy about this. But then again, there had to be some form of compromise, because we're looking at the inflation rate, and so they were asking for something beyond 30%. Now we've seen this base pay agreed, the 23% salary increment to public sector workers for the year 2024. Now, this salary increment will cover from January to June. Then after June, it would be increased to 25%, implemented between July and December. Now, the National Tripartite Committee also approved 22% increment for daily minimum wage. So take note of that, 22% increase in daily minimum wage from 14 cedis, 80 pesos, that's for 2023, to about 18 cedis for 2024. That's for the daily minimum wage. So this decision was arrived at with all of these issues taken into consideration the current state of the economy. But take a look at this. We tracked the increase in the daily minimum wage over a period of time from 2016 at least to this point. And if you are looking at this picture, bear in mind inflation, which also reduces or robs off the value of the money in your pocket, in this case, this minimum wage, over time. Because if prices of goods and services are going up over a particular period of time, in this case 1 year, you would expect that there is a certain corresponding, at least an appreciable increase that would cushion you against the impact of inflation. But look, 2016, 8 cedis was maintained in 2017 with some 80 pesos added onto it. In 2018, it was increased to 9 cedis, 68 pesos. 2019, the minimum wage was increased to 10 cedis, 65 pesos. In 2020, and during COVID, so the working population was asked to also bear with government because of the impact of COVID, take a little over, in fact, less than 3 cedis. So it was 11 cedis, 82 pesos. Then in 2021, it increased to 12 cedis, 53 pesos. In 2022, 13 cedis, 53 pesos. In 2023, as was announced earlier in the year, 14 cedis, 88 pesos. Then in 2024, the daily minimum wage is expected to go up to 18 cedis, 15 pesos. That's what was announced by the Minister of Employment and Labor Relations earlier today. Now, it is a compromise indeed that Labor had to take for all of this that is happening. And bear in mind that even though we've seen inflation reduce consistently over the past 5 months to less, in fact, over that 5-month period, almost 18% reduction in the inflation rate. From over 50%, we're talking about something below 38% now. So we're talking about this consistency, but then again, for members of the general public and the consuming public, not seeing the corresponding impact of this reduction in inflation rate on the prices of goods and services you buy on the market. Austin Game is a labor expert. He's joining us on Zoom. So Austin Game, thank you. Thank you so much for staying up to join us here on Ghana Tonight. And hearing Labor not too happy about this, but still had to compromise, bearing in mind the impact of inflation on this minimum wage and then the base payers agreed. Could anything better have been offered?
Thank you. Well, it's obvious that the government, certainly as employer, might be hiding behind the challenges they have in the management of the economy currently, especially so when they are with the IMF, well known to virtually all of us. So Labour, I think strategically, have got what perhaps somebody would say by miracle, because under normal circumstances, it couldn't have been done. But they've done exceptionally well in this circumstance. So it's not a bad deal, even though Ghana generally, we pay by inflation and It's been part of our DNA. Hopefully in the future, as serious as we would want to be, we should not be paying by that standard again. We should be paying by productivity. Then workers can get more, and productivity will expand, be enhanced, and therefore people can be paid more for their contribution. So, but this is a general thing meant for the public sector working people. So I think it's a reasonably good achievement.
Indeed. And in fact, there's been that proposal to also look at a living wage and not a minimum wage because of the current economic situation that we're dealing with as a country and how it's having a biting impact on the working population as well. How do you pursue that and also take into consideration this bit of productivity that you're talking about?
Yes, it has to be based on productivity. Indeed, that is what in a civilized society should be the case, so that people will be paid based on their contribution. You cannot pay just for the sake of it. Some people will have to pay for what they have been given now, including themselves, through taxation, through various other tax handles, and so forth and so on. And it's very expensive to be doing that. So we have to consciously plan as a nation to be a productive nation. It's not going to be by default. We have to plan it and ensure that it is done. Where we are now is very suicidal if we don't take care.
I see. What do you mean by it's very suicidal where we are now if we don't take care? Zosengame.
We cannot just be paying for the sake of paying. Mm-hmm. We pay for time. So if you go to work and you know your workload, you have to work within that time frame. And once you complete your task very well, you'll be appraised based on that, and you can be rewarded more than they are being rewarded now. The important thing is there will be an explosion of enhanced productivity in the nation. Our GDP will grow. We'll have money enough to take care of other things. Hopefully, there'll be almost negligible or no corruption, and therefore there will be funds available to undertake other things and further expand the economy, just as I'm sure people are talking about 24-hour economy. Once we do that, the sky is too short a limit for us.
No, so there was a point where government was pretending to be paying and workers also pretending to be working. So if we're going to consider productivity as a major factor as you're proposing going forward, what should be the yardstick in measuring productivity in the public sector? What has to be done?
Indeed, there is a very simple way. I will not say it's simpler, but there is a way. A frame will have to be, put in place to ensure that employers have a plan and they set targets or KPIs for each and every one based upon the objectives they are set for the year. Let's say example 2024-25. And so when they achieve that, depending upon the scores that they have agreed to use as a measure, and which will be done transparently. There's nothing in this 21st century that is impossible with the avalanche of technology. So clearly, whatever we are doing and setting ourselves backward is uncivilized, and we have to rediscover ourselves that we have to operate in a manner, according to even the labor law, every worker is expected to enhance the productivity of the employer based upon the tasks that will be set by the employer. But because we are not planning well, we are unable to match productivity, and pay people accordingly for it. People must be paid very, very well, but based upon your contribution. No contribution, no job.
No contribution, no job in need. Zosengame, appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Ghana Tonight. Is a labor expert, Austin Game there. So live here on Ghana Tonight. Coming up next, I sat face to face with the 45th Vice President of the United States of America, Albert Arnold Gore Jr., also known as Al Gore. to speak about good governance, corruption, and matters relating heavily on climate change. And he is in Ghana also putting together a training for young people especially to understand the impact of climate change. I sat with him on the sidelines of this all-important training that he put together for young people in the sub-region. When I caught up with him, he touched on issues of good governance, corruption, and climate change, and what has to be done to ensure that the right commitment and message is sent about African leaders committing to the fight against climate change. Take a look. And you talked about that fossil fuel colonialism. You spoke about the World Bank being a part of this fossil fuel colonialism that's being pushed, especially with Africa being a victim of that strategy. What do you mean by that?
Well, that is one area where we have had some progress. The former head of the World Bank was a climate denier in league with the fossil fuel polluters. But we now have a new head of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, who understands the need to solve the climate crisis, and he is moving boldly to implement new policies. But the World Bank also needs an infusion of more money from the wealthy countries of the world. And the World Bank, in cooperation with other multilateral development banks, should help to organize a program of debt reduction, debt cancellation, debt relief for African nations in return for agreements to protect nature and to adopt better climate solutions, because the indebtedness of African nations has risen in the wake of the pandemic and in the wake of Russia's sadistic invasion of Ukraine, which has pushed food prices much higher. So we also need reforms in the global system of allocating capital so that countries in West Africa, for example, don't have to pay interest rates that are a multiple of the interest rates paid by nations in North America and Europe.
And do you see the sense of reception of this proposal on the part of the World Bank to accept this the debt cancellation, debt forgiveness option to also offset the impact that some of these policies is having on the continent of Africa?
Those discussions are just beginning. The concept of canceling debt in return for protection of nature and protection of the climate was a concept that began 30, 40 years ago, but it needs to be returned to the global stage, because the debt service payments here in Ghana, well, in Africa generally, the amount that African nations pay to service their debt is twice as high as the amount being invested in renewable energy. That's obviously not the situation that we need, and the world as a whole needs to rise to this occasion and work with Africa and all the nations of Africa to implement these reforms.
And it is that commitment that I ask whether that is being exhibited. Do you see this happening, that there's a commitment to actually help Africa in this regard?
Well, I think the new head of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, as I said, is committed to the kind of progress we need. But the wealthy nations that should be recapitalizing the World Bank and helping the World Bank do its job, with them, that discussion is just beginning. The African Leaders Climate Summit a few months ago in Nairobi was really an inspiring event for me, because the African leaders spoke very clearly about the need to put a tax on these polluting fuels and to seek reforms that will enable African nations to gain more access to borrowing money and gaining financing for the installation of renewable energy.
You talk about the world leaders having a credibility problem.
Well, for example, the conference of the parties that will be held in Dubai next month, the head of that conference is the CEO of one of the largest and dirtiest fossil fuel companies. That's absurd. That company, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, is beginning plans to greatly expand their production of oil and gas by 50%. Their PR firms advised them to hold off until 2 weeks after the summit meeting, but they're expanding the production of these polluting fuels even as the world is trying to reduce the emissions from those fuels. And they lack credibility when they say that the solution is to try to capture the emissions, to go ahead and burn more and more oil and gas, but then try to capture the emissions as they're burned. It doesn't work. It's not practical. They can capture a little bit at great expense, but it's not a realistic solution. The solution is to phase down the use of fossil fuels and to phase out fossil fuels, when instead these companies are doubling down on more and more fossil fuels.
You earlier made reference to the heads of states of Africa, the climate summit in Nairobi. For us here on the continent, listening to all the speeches that were made and the commitments, the verbal commitments that were made to help fight climate change on the continent, there's a lot more focus, or that sense that you get the leaders on the continent looking at what they can get from this climate change conversation in terms of the monetary value of the trade measures that are put in place as against the commitment to really fight climate change or put measures in place to address the issues of climate change on the continent. So beyond the words, do you see any sense of commitment to put policies in place apart from what the monetary value they can get?
Yeah, well, it varies from country to country. Yours is a perceptive question because, yes, you will often hear these leaders put most of their emphasis on getting money from the rich countries. And I sympathize because the African nations need to get more money in order to move forward. But that should not be the primary objective. It's difficult to come up with solutions that don't require money, so I understand what they're saying. But there are a lot of initiatives that can be taken by African nations themselves, even as the world responds to this need for more resources. For example, many African nations are still subsidizing the burning of fossil fuels, forcing their taxpayers to give money to the fossil fuel companies to encourage more and more use of fossil fuels. Instead, those subsidies should be removed and the resources should be put into the energy transition and the sustainability solutions that are going to help us resolve this climate crisis. We know the answer. We have the solutions. We need the political will to implement them, but political will is itself a renewable resource.
Political will is a renewable resource. Right. Let's get a bit more into that.
Well, when people gain the knowledge of what the danger is and what the solutions are, it makes it easier to form the political will necessary for people to reason together and decide to make a commitment to solve this crisis.
And do you see that political will being exhibited?
Oh yes, I do. I particularly see it with young people. And young people in Africa have been lifting their voices and demanding change.
And then you see there's a lot of young people, even here in Ghana, demonstrations and so on, demanding that things have to change. Things cannot continue to be the same every time and expecting different results. Should that continue?
Oh yes, definitely. And that's yet another reason to have this training here in Ghana. And you know, sometimes when young people continue to advocate for change and when Mother Nature intervenes with these terrible disasters, the older people say, oh, maybe these young people are right. Maybe we do need to change. Many policymakers are now beginning to change. Another factor that is leading to change is that the cost of solar electricity and wind electricity and electric vehicles continues to come down. It's already cheaper. It is beginning to be cheaper by so much that only fools would not switch over to it.
And for a lot of the young people, especially because they are not seeing the impact of some of these things that you talk about, partly as a result of issues with corruption and so on the continent, and I'm sure that bothers you as well, the increasing cases of corruption and so on, and the seeming lack of commitment by leadership to fight it. What has to be done?
Well, when I was Vice President of the United States, I sponsored international conferences to fight official corruption. And of course, it's a problem all over the world, but when it gets to the levels of hyper-corruption, then it changes everything. One cause of corruption is what the economists call a resource curse, when too much of a country's wealth is in one resource that is extracted in ways that enrich the wealthy elites, and the poor people don't get any benefit from it. And the wealthy elites sometimes become vulnerable to accepting bribes in order to keep this system going. In Nigeria, 86% of the balance of payments with the rest of the world economy comes from fossil fuels. 0.6% of the employment that gives income to the people is related to fossil fuels. So it drives inequality that becomes hyper inequality that feeds corruption. So getting away from this dependence on dirty and poisonous fossil fuels is one of the ways to fight against corruption.
And that's one of the many ways that can be done. What other ways, in your view, do you expect that the leaders on the continent must commit to fight corruption?
Well, transparency is the most important solution. There's an old saying that the best disinfectant is sunlight. When the people can see what is going on, then those who are tempted to be corrupt are scared to continue their nefarious activities.
Your Excellency, I'll go. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sitting with us. Appreciate it. There's more of this as well on 3news.com. The full interview will air on New Day on TV3 in the morning. So you can also look out for that. It's live here on Ghana Tonight. Now, coming up next, we continue our engagement in with key stakeholders and interest groups on their expectations ahead of the Finance Minister's presentation of the 2024 budget before Parliament tomorrow. Let's hear from you, especially, and how this impacts directly on you as well. And before we get into all the matters arising, a number of the members of Parliament we spoke to earlier today, our Chief Parliamentary Correspondent Kumla Kluchi interacted with MPs ahead of the budget presentation tomorrow, and they also had their thoughts to share. Take a look.
Kerry comes to the House tomorrow with budget. This is the first budget after the IMF. Your expectations?
In fact, I'm very excited. Number one, I'm excited because this is Kenya's last budget. Ghana will gain independence, financial independence from him. Kenya will go after this budget. But to me, to be sincere with you, there's no budget. The man is not coming to say anything. What is he coming to say? What has he spent? What is the income? What is he talking about? What is going on in Ghana? A dead economy. Ghana is dead. We are happy that after this budget, Ghana will go away and Ghana will gain independence and Ghana will resurrect again.
Many have asked, especially industry, have asked that new taxes should not be introduced because of the difficulties.
We are ashamed of himself to introduce new tax. He can't introduce any new tax because he'll be ashamed of himself. The taxes are already too much. So he cannot talk about tax. That is what I'm saying, that there's no budget because he can't talk about tax. The income that we are looking at, there's no income. There's no income. The man cannot talk about tax. There's no expenditure. So he cannot talk of they have done this, they have done that. Probably what we are hoping to hear from him tomorrow will be a quotation. His last Bible quotation. and then we'll do him goodbye.
As far as those of us in the Ministry of Food and Agriculture are concerned, our expectation and everything is about how we can get the resources to grow more food to feed their needs. That is the summary of everything that you want to have. And so far, there are indications that the budgetary allocation for the ministry is going to increase. And the new Planting for Food and Jobs Phase 2 that we have introduced, which we say is no longer going to be input subsidy, but rather input credit, that is where the catch is. Because everybody in this country who is interested in agriculture, once you show where your land is and you are registered, all the coordinates are picked, automatically you are giving to an aggregator, and he is going to ensure that your land preparation, your seed supply, your fertilizer supply, extraction services that you need, the chemicals that you need to ward off pests and diseases, all these things will be supplied to you as input credits. Then we are interested in the output. So at the end of the day, at the output level, then we determine how much we have given you, we deduct it.
We'll be having the Chartered Institute of Bankers Chief Executive Officer joining us, Robert Jatto, and then also Professor John Gachie, and we'll have the President of Ghana Union of Traders Association also joining us right after this quick break as we have a conversation ahead of this crucial budget for the 2024 fiscal year. It's an election year. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. This is Ghana Tonight. We're live on TV3 Ghana on Facebook. Now, one of the major issues that comes up is the prices of goods and services on the market. And that's what you and I, consuming public, are concerned about. How much of your money is going into buying food items and other goods that we haven't seen any relative reduction or change in the price over a period. And that's where, when we see inflation going down, you look at also how it's impacting on your money, right? Take a look at this. From January to today, because the inflation rate for the month of October was announced by the Ghana Fiscal Service earlier today. It's gone down to 35.2%. But if you look at the trend from January, 53.6, February down to 52.8, 45% in March, April 41.2. There's been a consistent reduction in the inflation rate over a period from May 42.2%, June 42.5%, and July 43.1, August 40.1, September 38.1, and then in October, 35.2. So you look at the drivers of inflation, food items, prices, agri impact, and so on. And then also you talk about the petroleum prices and imported items as well. So if we're looking at these major drivers of inflation and we're seeing the rates going down, for you, the consumer, the only way the inflation rate going down is going to make sense to you is if it has a direct impact on your everyday life. Professor John Gachie is joining us. He's the Dean of the University of Cape Coast Business School. Professor Gachie, thank you for joining us here on Ghana Tonight. So what is accounting for the disconnect in the continuous reduction in the inflation rate, but then again, the consuming public say, you know, I haven't seen a relative or corresponding reduction in the prices of goods on the market?
Well, there is this thing called pass-through effect. That it takes some time for reduction in variable like inflation to start influencing other variable to have full effect. But the question is, how long should the pass-through effect be? This indicator we call inflation has been reducing significantly over a period of time. In fact, with the inflation dropping to 35.2%, it means that inflation has dropped over or around 18% down. that 18% is actually enough to influence the policy rate down, and it's also supposed to be influencing prices on the market. So I believe people are right when they express this concern. But this argument around pass-through effect can only hold for a short period of time and when the reduction is gradual. But when you see reduction of a variable like inflation from 54% and now is around 35%, then definitely it must drive down other indicators.
I see. But then again, for this specific reference to inflation, 35.2% now, and you talk about the pass-through effect, so that it will make sense to us, the consuming public, what are some of the measures that you expect to be implemented or introduced in this 2024 budget tomorrow to sustain the continuous reduction in the inflation rate that we have seen, which would have direct impact on the policy rates because of the Bank of Ghana's own inflation targeting, which then eventually also has an impact on the cost of credit, interest rates that public sector is paying for. So what policies should be put in place?
Well, I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel. When inflation was rising, we saw prices rising. We saw other indicators also rising. We saw lending rates rising. So if inflation has gone down significantly, then it's only reasonable to expect that these indicators will also begin to fall. The only thing that the pass-through effect talks about is that the fall in inflation does not automatically follow by a fall in other indicators immediately. But I am saying that this is not a gradual reduction in inflation. This is a big jump down inflation, and it has taken a period of time now. So we need to see how that is reflected in other indicators. Hopefully, the Bank of Ghana will be meeting, I believe, very soon on the monetary policy. I believe that that will have an implication for a downward trend in the monetary policy. And if that happens, then we also expect interest rate to be going down, and that will be redefining the environment for consumption and the environment for business.
I see. Now, just for the benefit of the viewer, so essentially it is not the case that for as long as you see inflation rate going down, there wouldn't be the claim that because inflation is going down, price of goods and services have also gone down. Nobody can make that claim, is it not?
I think the joy for everyone claiming that inflation is going down is because we know that those things that are affected by inflation should also keep going down. Prices on the market should be going down, and other prices related to that should be going down. But the point I'm making is that per what I talk about, the pass-through effect shows that those prices and the rest will not go down immediately we see inflation going down. But see, the kind of reduction we are seeing is a significant reduction. To see inflation drop over a 5-month period by about 18 percentage points, that is a significant drop, and that is a period long enough to have to start seeing a downward reflection on prices. And we have not seen that. So what the point I'm making is that very soon, Monetary Policy Committee will be meeting. If they regard the reduction in inflation and take a decision to reduce the policy rate, that will have effect on the lending rate, and that will also for businesses.
Right. So I appreciate your time and thank you very much for joining us, the Dean of the University of Cape Coast Business School. If you stay with me. And you asked a question, and it's on the minds of all of us consumers, why this reduction in the inflation rate consistently is not impacting on prices as yet. Is it because of the cost of production and the impact of taxes? That's where Dr. Joseph Obeng is joining us. He's the president of the Ghana Union of Trade Association, GUTA. Dr. Obeng, how much of an impact have the taxes and then also the quarterly review of the tariffs had on your business? Reason why probably we are not experiencing this positive development with the reduction in inflation rate consistently over the period?
Yeah, it's very worrying. As you know, it didn't start from today. During the last quarter of 2022, businesses in the country suffered a lot because of the depreciation of the cedi. Most of us found our capitals being depleted over 50%. Now, because we also had a program with the IMF, new taxes have to be introduced alongside the many taxes that we are paying already. So Ghanaian businesses are saddled with numerous taxes. Cost of clearance is extorsively high at the port, because the cost items at the port numbers are around 20 different cost items like AU levy, COVID levy, special import levy, and all that. These are lined up in about 20 cost items, all cumulates to about 55 to 65% on our invoice value as duties and payment of other charges. This is unprecedented among nations. We have to contend with high interest rate. And we are also being consumed by high rate of inflation. You know, inflation as it is also eating up the purchasing power of the consuming public. You know, business thrives on turnover. Now, our turnover is curtailed by this single fact of inflation. We are uncompetitive in the sub-region also. For the business that we do, we are not doing it in isolation. We do it with our neighboring countries, and we are very uncompetitive. And you know also that we are being confronted with high utility bills that does not create the enabling environment for businesses. The VAT as it is structured, the structure of VAT is not conducive also for business. Until recently, we were paying a flat rate of 3% across the board. Now we are being migrated to standard rate of cumulatively the 15% that is that could be retrieved, and then the straight line tax of 6% cumulates to about 21%. Aside that, it is not uniform because we have those who are paying the flat rate of 4% and others who are not paying at all by the virtue of the threshold. So this is the confusing nature of business. And this is how everybody is facing. So going forward, that's our expectation in this budget. We are just telling government that cost of doing business is extremely high, that it has become very unbearable.
I see.
And that we all know that excessive taxation impedes growth of businesses.
Indeed. And so I just want to find out, because you have been having meetings with the finance ministry ahead of this budget tomorrow. What exactly have you been telling the finance minister about what has to be done in this 2024 budget to address the plethora of concerns that you have just outlined?
We made it clear that when they were coming on 2017, they said there were so many nuisance taxes, and then they made efforts to clear them off the table. Now the nuisance taxes are creeping back in force and other forms, which is not making businesses thrive. And so some of the nuisance taxes that have come back is the COVID-19 levy. It came for one purpose it was one purpose tax that came to help combat the disease. Now the disease is not off the table, so it should be taken out of the table. Then we have the 2% special import levy that was also introduced by the previous government, that after the sunset, that we're in a serious problem, and that when things get better, we'll take it off the table. And that will become a tax in perpetuity. We are still paying. And all these things should be taken out of the table so that the cost of doing business become a very affordable, so that consuming public can also have the respite. Yes. And so that's the situation. So we want government to prune down. And whilst doing that, let me draw your attention to one fact.
Okay.
That one fact is that since about 5 years, we've been having excess. We are exceeding our revenue targets. If we are exceeding our revenue targets, and still this revenue is insufficient to us, then we have to look at how we spend this revenue. It means that we are overspending. It means that we are not ensuring value for money of our expenditure.
I see.
It means that we are not applying prudence and efficiency.
Okay.
In the way we have to expend this revenue.
Right.
So
Dr. Zobeng, appreciate your time. And all of these that you have outlined, I'm sure you make the point that you've made these suggestions to the finance minister. Let's go to the banking sector, because that was also heavily hit as a result of the impact of this domestic debt exchange program. Majority of the banks posted losses as at the end of the financial year 2022. And at least the first, second, third quarter, we've seen some of them also posting some positive signals, but not strong enough. But Robert Jatto is the Chief Executive Officer of the Chartered Institute of Bankers. Thank you so much for joining us here on Ghana Tonight. Now, with the impact that the banking sector received as a result of this DDEP, you are yet to have any cushioning from the Financial Stability Fund, yet to be established. So what are the specific measures that for you, the banking sector, expect to be put in place to help you recover going forward?
Thank you very much. I think that as a banking sector, you're absolutely right. We've been significantly impacted by the DDEP. And I think if you look at the exit 2022 numbers, you saw the impairments, but we are beginning to take giant steps forward. We are, as a sector, recovering. If you look at the numbers posted in the first quarter and second quarter, you can see that a number of banks are turning the corner. But with that said, any economic policy of government and budget for that matter, it's an important indicator and something that banks, we address our minds to carefully. And so in terms of expectation, I think for me, for the sector, it will be clarity, credibility, and certainly commitment. Clarity about the economic indicators and direction that we are going to. Certainly the credibility, because we then need to demonstrate that we are committed and are able to deliver on the things that we commit to. But definitely execution will be very, very important, and commitment to that execution will be key. Certainly the macroeconomic indicators will be ones that, of course, impact all of us, but even more so the banking sector. And therefore, we'll be keen to see that they are trending in the right direction. But whilst we are interested in the macroeconomic indicators, certainly we shouldn't be sacrificing the micro businesses. And as a banking sector, we are keen to bank the real economy, and those are MSMEs and businesses. And therefore, there should be policies, that will support the real economy. We know that 2024 is an election year, so expenditure control and measures will be very, very important. I think also as a sector, if you look at Bank of Ghana, sustainable banking principles, which have been issued. As a sector, we are working very hard to implement same, and therefore policies that help extract value from environmental, social, and governance-related matters will be important. Also, because of where we are, the climate change conversation is not going away anytime soon. We've seen the floods from the Akosombo Volta spillage, and therefore we need to do something. Therefore, in this particular policy statement of government and budget for that matter, would expect that there will be some clear, credible initiatives around same. Thanks.
Indeed. And I appreciate your thoughts on the very comprehensive expectations indeed. And we'll see how tomorrow plays out for you in the banking sector. Robert Jatto is Chief Executive Officer of the Chartered Institute of Bankers. Thank you so much for joining us here on Ghana Tonight. Before we go, the strike by jurors in Kumasi has disrupted justice delivery as cases tried on indictment are unable to progress. My colleague Ibrahim Abubakar has been looking at the impact of this situation there in the Ashanti region. Take a look.
Police Inspector Ahmed Chumesi over the death of his girlfriend, Veronica Dapa, and the trial of a 25-year-old tailor apprentice over the death of a KNUST Level 200 student at Sewa, and many others were all adjourned due to the absence of jurors, even though the accused persons, state and defense counsels were all present in court.
From 6th of November till today's 14th, we have mixed 13 cases. I think coming Thursday we'll have about 9 cases. So if my members are not agreed to come, meaning you just imagine.
The decision of the jurors to absent themselves from court is delaying justice delivery. This, they admit, is unfortunate, but insist is necessary.
My people don't have money to come to the court. As I told you, some of them live as far as Mankran, so it's far from Kumasi. You see, every day come to the court. He spend 300 Ghana cedis every day, you see, to purchase fuel. Others travel far to Edum. After the court, they will take another 3 cars back home. So if this allowance that will support them is not there, how can they come?
The Ashanti Regional Accountant of the Judicial Service has disclosed government has released funds for payment of 5 out of the 15 months allowance arrears. Leadership of the jurors, however, are not certain when they will resume, since they are still owed from January to October 2023.
Don't forget that they have borrowed money to purchase fuel. They have borrowed money to pay for their TNT. So this little money that has come, they are using this money to pay. So tomorrow, if we meet tomorrow and they are saying that we are expecting even part of 2023, and once we don't have 2023, we are not coming to court, there's nothing I can do.
The jurors in Ghana's justice system determine whether an accused person is guilty of an offense he or she has been charged with based on the evidence presented in court, whilst the judge passes a sentence based on the verdict of the jury.
For the many justice seekers who have cases at the Kumasi High Court, coming to court without your case being heard is troubling and causes undue delay to justice delivery. But until the juries resume, all criminal cases that require their services will have to continue suffering from needless adjournment. Ibrahim Abubakar, TV3 News, Kumasi.
Ibrahim is going to stay the steam on this matter in the coming days. Thank you so much for joining us here on Ghana Tonight. Join us tomorrow as we give you comprehensive coverage of the budget presentation by the Finance Minister. On behalf of the President, as mandated by the Constitution in Parliament, we'll have a studio in Parliament as well to bring you all the exclusive interviews as well on TV3 and on 3FM 92.7 and across all the Media Journal platforms. I'm Alfred Okanse. Have a good night.
Ghana Tonight is brought to you by
Flamingo Paint. Superior durability, superior hiding, superior coverage, simply superior.